The quirkier side of life. The Todd Starnes Commentary.
President Obama is suffering from a classic case of having a bad week. It started at a memorial service for Nelson Mandela. The handshake heard round the world. Lots of Cuban Americans not too happy with the leader of the free world, shaking hands with the dictator, Raul Castro. Then there was the selfie he took at the memorial service with the prime ministers of Great Britain and Denmark. Mrs. Obama had that somebody's going to be sleeping on the Oval Office couch look on her face. And if that's not bad enough, a new Quinnipiac poll came out yesterday. The general consensus? There's been no hope and no change. His job approval rating at an all-time low, 38%. A majority of American voters now say President Obama is neither honest nor trustworthy, and he's not a strong leader. Yep, the president is having a bad week. I'm Todd Starnes.
And America is having a bad 5 years. Welcome back. Gray and Durham's Nothing But Truth. Great to be back with you. Thank you, Todd Starnes. Coming up top of the hour, Hans von Spakovsky talking Colorado Baker, Church and State, Satanic Memorial, Satanist Memorial versus the Ten Commandments. We got a lot to cover. Oh, and the Fourth Amendment, NSA Fourth Amendment. Hans von Spakovsky will be with us, senior legal analyst at the Heritage Foundation. Now, we just heard about the handshake heard around the world from Todd Starnes, and it actually is pretty cool because that goes to exactly what we're going to be talking about with the handshake with Raul Castro and President Obama and what he believes. Dick Cheney identified and said something about President Obama, former vice president, earlier on this week. And he talked about what President Obama believes and speaking to the Iranian deal and the overall foreign policy. Here's the former vice president. Roll it.
Well, I don't think that Barack Obama believes in the U.S. as an exceptional nation and the whole concept that the world's a safer place, more peaceful place, when the U.S. is powerful, able to, in fact, project its will in various places around the world. We're withdrawing from the Middle East. We're cutting the Defense Department and defense budget to the bone, doing enormous damage there. People no longer are adversaries, no longer fear us. Our friends no longer trust us. And the bottom line is nobody cares much in the Middle East anymore what the U.S. thinks because we don't keep our commitments. We don't follow through. In Iran, we've got a very, very serious problem going forward, and a deal now been cut. The same people that brought us, you can keep your insurance if you want, are telling us they've got a great deal in Iran with respect to their nuclear program. I don't believe it.
A lot of people share the vice president's opinion on some or all of what he had said. I happen to believe that President Obama doesn't believe in American exceptionalism. I believe he thinks he's doing right, what's right for this nation by transforming it into a greater welfare state, not being in the position of leader in the free world. He believes Europe should be returned to its leading place in the world. He even said that in a speech during what was called the apology tour. I believe that when he didn't listen to his generals, and there were 3 times when it came to Afghanistan, from troop levels to announcing withdrawal and the timeline, that the decision looked more in line with political determinations as opposed to the way to advance our agenda and understand that we need to win. He's about ending wars. Well, wars either are fought to stalemates relatively, grow cold in that sense, or they're lost, or they're won, or they are ongoing. And President Obama is talking about the 2 front lines when he talks about Iraq and Afghanistan. And those 2 fronts, those are ongoing because it is part of a greater war. Those are battles in a greater war. And we're still fighting it. And it's not a police action, it's a war. It's not something that we should be reactive to. It's something we should be proactive and look at the fact that we don't ascribe and allow for rights to particular groups that do not play by the rules of the Geneva Conventions. But I digress. In our most recent deal with Iran, and from what people have learned about the deal, they don't trust it. This, like Obamacare, is not passing the smell test with both Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives. Evidence of this was revealed yesterday during a hearing where a Democratic congressman did challenge John Kerry, laud him for his running for president, said he supported him, big fan of the Secretary of State, but said this deal is a bad deal with Iran. Roll it.
We worked very hard out in California for you, and I think you would have been a magnificent president. So I'm not a so-called friend, I'm a believer. However, when it comes to this deal, I'm completely against it. I do think it's naive. And I don't think it makes us safer, unfortunately, and I don't think it makes our allies safer, especially Israel. Instead, I agree with those that say that sanctions were working, but that we didn't ratchet them up enough, that we should have tightened them down even more.
So he sees that, and why is this important? Well, a broken clock can be right twice a day, and that oftentimes is the case when we talk about the left, my opinion, of course, and their views, be it economic or foreign policy. With foreign policy, name an issue, cultural or otherwise. But what he is saying is, if you reference history, it doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, and it looks like you're making the same mistakes as others have made in history, and the consequences have been absolutely disastrous. It has increased the butcher's bill beyond what it could have been by at least tenfold. And we see this, and that's why we hear of Munich and the comparisons of the conversations we've had with the likes of Professor Bruce Thornton. Now, I say this because I want to take any kind of real emotion out of this one right now and speak to the record, the results, and what can happen, because I don't need to overstate what can happen. We're talking about the survival as we know it of Western civilization. We're talking about our number one ally, arguably in the region, I would argue in the world, that being Israel and its ability to defend herself. We're talking about people who want to bring on a worldwide genocidal Armageddon to bring back the 12th Imam and to have a worldwide caliphate. We're talking about a deal that has brought Saudi Arabia and Israel together allied against this deal. And we're talking about a man, as I started out with, our president, who doesn't understand that weakness invites aggression and that others do not share our values or desire peace in the way that we understand peace. You see, when we talk about peace, we're not talking about North Korea, because North Korea has relative peace. They also have concentration camps. They torture and kill anybody who really disagrees with the regime or suspected of that. People are getting shorter there because of malnutrition. You've got an absolute nut bar in charge of Kim Jong-un. Is that it? Grandson of Kim Il-sung. So you have this, and you have things being played out. You have the North Korean deal. Now what's going to happen with Iran? Iran's a little different, though, because as we've learned, we've talked about this with Dr. Waleed Phares. We talked about it with Ryan Morrow. We talked about it with Pastor Aaron Free, all of which have written extensively on this issue and studied it. Dr. Waleed Phares is probably the world's foremost expert on it. And we look at what they're trying to do. North Korea and Iran are working together on developing their missile technology along with their nuclear technology. So when they are nuclear capable, they have the technology to launch. See, they're doing that together because they've, not like the Obama administration, have learned from history. And they realize that they don't share our values. But people like peace. They don't want conflict. Have you ever tried to identify a conflict at work or in your family and said, hey, everybody's kind of getting along, but there's a real problem? But people would rather bear the ills they have than fly to others they know not of. Thus conscience makes cowards of us all. Brought on by Polonius there, a little Hamlet. So the idea is, hey, yeah, we know it's bad, it's a little nuts, a little crazy, and it's harmful, but we know how to live with it, and we'll deal with the pain as it is, and we'll just keep enduring it because we don't know what happens when you actually confront it. And this happens professionally, personally, and otherwise. And when you do identify the problem, oftentimes you become that problem because you're stirring things up. You're pointing out incompetence. You're pointing out dishonesty. You're pointing out behavior that is harmful to others. You're exposing it, and now people are going to have to deal with it, whether they like it or not. And most people, hey, when they see something, they're going to walk away. It's unfortunate, but it's our nature. We are fallen. And when you do that with nuclear technology and development of nukes from a country that has more blood on its hands, second only to Al-Qaeda, who has not been held to account in any way, and is actively pursuing the destruction of Israel and the United States, there are going to be consequences for this. Mind you, there are other enemies too. We have Russia and China, Cuba as well, of course. But back to the point, if you identify it, there's a problem. But if you kind of say, hey, look, yeah, there's a problem. These people are dangerous, but we're just going to get along. We're really not going to deal with it. Now, you won't say that. You won't even identify. You'll say, maybe things are bad, but we can get along. We'll just talk and talk and talk. We'll never really confront. We'll never really take a stand that may make us unpopular, may make some Euro-socialists call us a bunch of bullies because we stand up to bullies after 17 UN resolutions. We actually go after dictators that slaughter their own people, and we speak out against it. We actually identify regimes as being illegitimate, even though they've had elections, because those elections are absolutely perverted and corrupted, and we don't buy into them. We recognize that the Cold War was real, and it was ongoing. There was a domino effect, and there's context with it, and that Gorbachev didn't bring down the Soviet Union. Ronald Reagan's policies did by bankrupting him and also staying to the fact that he'd walk away from a deal, Reykjavik, if he had to. A bad deal was better than, a no deal was better than a bad deal. He didn't blink. He had the willingness to call out what the Soviet Union was and what Russia is today under Putin, which is an evil empire. I don't know if you'd call it an evil empire, but he's trying to restore it, and he's a butcher. He's a butcher. And I think a vast majority of us see this, and certainly it's sharpened when we see what happens to Israel, and you have Bibi Netanyahu let in the front door and pushed out the back door, and lecturing the president on what the realities are of human nature. And that's something that the left doesn't understand when it comes to government, the divided government, the balance of powers, nor do they understand it when it comes to foreign policy and dictators. You understand the fact that when the president speaks, he's not talking a lot about individual freedom. When he speaks to people about listening to their people and referencing the part of Mandela's legacy, and I have to put this in there, Mandela's legacy that was good, a good part of it, which was to advocate the giving up of power after you had it and leaving it peacefully, and understanding that, yes, that is awesome, and not holding the people who imprisoned him and having vengeance on them. That's great, but you can't ignore other parts of him. So as much as I highlight the extraordinary things that he did in his life, there were also extraordinary moments of willful blindness. And we have to do that because we don't want to deify someone. We don't want to deify anybody. We've got to see them for their faults as well as their achievements. And that's what's happening right now. So back to what President Obama did. He shook hands with Raul Castro. Here is here is Lester Holt talking about that handshake. Roll it.
President Obama's speech.
Too many of us on the sidelines, comfortable in complacency or cynicism, when our voices must be heard.
Resonated powerfully with the audience and the assembled world leaders. And that handshake with Cuba's president, a true Mandela moment.
It's the power of Nelson Mandela to bring President Barack Obama together and Raul Castro together here in South Africa.
The selfie with the Danish and British leaders hogging the front pages today, a get-together moment Mandela himself may have relished.
I don't really look at through Mandela's eyes there, because I don't think we are really qualified to do that. Look at his record, extraordinary achievements, forgiveness, etc. Also extraordinary blind spots as referenced. But John Lewis speaking to bringing Raul Castro and President Obama together, there have been situations where leaders have been put next to each other in the sense of dictators and presidents, but not to allow a photo op. That's the big drop there. Check out Otto Risch's work on that with the National Review, bringing the full history in mind. I think it's disgusting that the man did this. It was a great opportunity for Cuba, the Cuban leader, to use this as a propaganda piece, and it exposes the fact that a man who has done less to defend freedom, more to confuse it, as well as supported the likes of Mohamed Morsi, has made declarations when it comes to red lines and not enforced them, and had a willful blindness to the use of chemical weapons, and now is embracing an Iranian regime secretly right after an election while undermining our greatest ally in the region, and I would argue the world. We see President Obama for what he is, and what he is our president. And that comes with the responsibility of actually being the leader of the free world. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, AFR Talk.